Okay, so thank you all for joining us for another Women in Local Leadership speaker series. This is we're very excited. Dr. Grant does so many things, and Jill will talk about that. I'm going to introduce Jill, and I want to thank our sponsors for the program, 3 Mentor Advisory, Mountain One Bank, Brigham Health, and Hollywood Agency. They help us continue to do these wonderful programs throughout the year. And so Jill Amado, who briefly introduced herself a little bit earlier, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her, is the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Mountain One. She has over 15 years experience in marketing communications management in the financial sector and is the leader of Mountain One's communication and brand strategy. She is particularly proud of Mountain One's award-winning brand ambassador, their very own spokesgoat, which you will see on Bob and Jill's backgrounds there. Jill has a bachelor's degree in economics from UMass Amherst and volunteers for several community organizations. She lives in Kingston with her husband and 3 daughters. Jill, take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you so much. A little bit about Mountain One, a proud sponsor of today's event. At Mountain One, there's no mountain too high or terrain too rough. We've been helping customers navigate the landscape of consumer banking, business banking, insurance, and investments for over 125 years. As a financial services company with strong roots in the communities we serve, our commitment to helping customers succeed is more than just our business mission. It's in our nature. With locations in the Berkshires and the South Shore, Quincy, Rockland, and Scituate specifically, we continue to provide the expertise and guidance you need to face challenges big, small, and everywhere in between. Mountain One is a very proud sponsor of the Chamber and of the Women in Local Leadership series, so thank you so much for having us here today. Now let's introduce our guest of honor. I'm so excited to be talking with Dr. Mary Grant this morning, where she'll share with us her experience and her perspectives on leadership. Dr. Grant's extensive and impressive career in public higher education spans nearly 30 years and includes significant leadership positions such as President of the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, MCLA, and Chancellor of the University of North Carolina in Asheville. Dr. Grant is currently with Bridgewater State University, where she serves as Senior Administrative Fellow for Civics and Social Justice, leading the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice and serving as co-chair of the President's Special Task Force on Racial Justice. I've been fortunate enough to work with Mary through her involvement on Mountain One's Community Advisory Committee for the past few years, so I'm very honored to lead you through this conversation today. Mary, why don't we start with your most recent announcement, which I'm sure is top of mind for you right now. I believe the news officially came out yesterday that in July, you'll be starting a new and very exciting role as President of Massachusetts College of Art and Design, also known to us locals as MassArt. And first, from all of us, congratulations, a very enthusiastic congratulations on that news. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Jill. It's very excited. I had been doing really great and interesting and important work at Bridgewater, and I was nominated for this position. And the more I explored it, the more I thought this school really makes a difference. It will be celebrating 150 years in another 2 years. When you think about what's happening in the city of Boston right now, it's a very dynamic time. And I just, I think about the intersection of arts and culture and what it does for communities. And in the work that I did at both MCLA and UNC Asheville, it was really about how an educational institution connecting with the cultural sector can make a significant difference in the lives of our communities and the educational experiences and opportunities for our students. So I'm thrilled. It's going to be a busy few weeks getting things wrapped up and then gearing up for this wonderful next chapter.
That sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. And as you and I talked offline, a true leader never stops growing, never stops learning. And as we are all works in progress, regardless of our success, that's a really important lesson to learn early on in your career. And I'd love to hear from you about that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you keep yourself open to growth opportunities or what you do to ensure your professional development never stops?
Sure. And thanks. And also, I just want to thank the Chamber for this opportunity and Mountain One and all of you who have joined this morning. So this is the chance to be in a room like this, even Zoom rooms, as we're all learning to perfect and have some conversation, is a lovely way to start this beautiful day. So I just want to thank the Chamber, and thank you, Jill, and thank the good folks at Mountain One. I know Bob Frazier's with us this morning, and so it's been a real pleasure to be on the Community Advisory Board. And I think, that's a good example, when opportunities present themselves, continuing to learn, be in new environments. I've never been one to shy away from that. I figure, I look around and I say, other people do these things. Some things I don't think one should try unprepared, like, brain surgery or rocket science, perhaps. But, for most of the things that we do in our daily lives, it's about being curious. It's also about finding mentors, people you can talk to and explore and kick around an idea. And then looking at others who have gone before you. And I've found that, anyone who you ask, I've always been so impressed by how gracious individuals are with sharing their professional pathway or their journeys. It's fun to get a chance to talk about what you've done and how you've done it. So, I've never been hesitant to ask somebody questions. And even now I see somebody and I say, oh, I want to learn from that person. I want to find out, how they do what they do, how they think, how they got where they are. And I think that's that human dynamic is so interesting. The chance to take, and then I've also found taking what I've learned in other situations and applying it to the next. So as I think about going into MassArt, yes, I have experience having been a college president and a chancellor, but I don't have experience at MassArt. So the importance of learning a place, learning the culture, what people care about, what they really aspire to, that's part of the really interesting and fun work to do early on as you're getting to know your new community. So I think it's about just always being open to opportunity, being willing to take risks, learning from the things that don't work, because that's often when we do our best learning. Surrounding yourself with really smart people. That's the other thing too. It's like putting together a team of people who challenge you, who are your truth tellers, who look at the world a little bit differently. That is so important because, when we all look at the world in the same way, that can be pretty boring. So I think, having others who bring perspective is so great. And then looking around and learning from others opportunities and problem solving. So I think it's just being open and curious and willing to step back and reflect too. I think taking that reflecting time to understand what worked, understand what maybe didn't, and then the thinking about, how you do something differently the next time. So it is about lifelong learning all the time.
Absolutely. And a few things stuck out to me, first of which is it's this self-awareness that no one knows it all and no one has learned it all. Absolutely not. And being willing to keep your ears open and eyes open for other people and the impact they can have on your lives is just, it's so important. It's so important. So I want to hear from you about, we all look at you as a leader. You're inspiring, and we look at you and say, that is what a leader is. And I know that you have leaders in your life as well. So for you, what does leadership mean? And can you point to one person or characteristics that really spell out leadership to you?
Sure. I think leadership can happen at every level of an organization. And I think, or a community group. And I think we've come to associate leadership with title. And that, so there's leadership that does come with title. You have, whether you're the president or the CEO or the superintendent or director, but leadership happens at every level of the organization. So I think it's about recognizing that, and it's about from wherever you are seated, you can lead. You have that opportunity, and you have to work with others to make those opportunities accessible and available. I have found, Jill, over in my professional life so far, and I'm not done, is the importance of tapping people on the shoulder, because sometimes, and I think particularly for women, we often don't see ourselves, sometimes reflected in the formal leadership role. So that role model is critically important, being able to see others at the table who resemble you a little bit more, and then having allies in that process, people who will tap you on the shoulder and say, I think you should think about this. And so one of the things I've always listened to and I've tried to do is to, identify leadership pathways for younger colleagues, to say, think about this, try this, because if it's someone you really trust, who's not going to lead you, to a place where you're going to blow yourself up, at least not intentionally, taps you on the shoulder and says, you should think about this. Listen to that. That's really important because we often are moving too fast and we don't see ourselves in those places. So when somebody you trust taps you on the shoulder and says, I think you should think about this, that's always a good place to start to listen. So I've tried to do that in every organization that I've been in, look around and talent scout, who's doing really creative work, who shows up, who am I missing from the table, and create more seats at the table and really fill them with the talent around you, because then that's how you help to energize and grow and strengthen an organization. I think it's also about creating opportunities for members of your team to lead in other places, being involved in community-based organizations, getting involved in boards, doing other things that help you grow and stretch and bring your capacity to different venues. So that ongoing identification of leaders at every level of an institution matters. And some of the most powerful leadership I've seen happen is some of that really good old-fashioned grassroots community-based organizing through informal leadership that can organize and galvanize a community to bring people together to work towards a change. So I think it's about formal leadership, informal leadership, and recognizing and developing it at every single level of an organization or community. And, when I think about in my own life, people who I've seen do that work so well, I hearken back, my roots are in community social work, community engaged social work. And so I think about people like Marian Wright Edelman, who was just a trailblazer in looking at issues of social justice and equity and changed the trajectory of lives for so many young people, did really meaningful work in trying to change outcomes and community-based health indicators and social justice work. And so, I think about people like that whose work I've admired and aspired to, someone like that. And then on a more local level, it's an organization I've just come to know in the past few years, Project 351, and the director there, Carolyn Casey, who I actually is on my board for the Institute. They just do such great work in every city and town across Massachusetts, inspiring leadership of 8th graders, who become that next generation of servant and civic leaders. And so, there's just inspirational leadership that happens in so many ways. And, I think about closer to home, and I think about more broadly those who have inspired me. And I could sit here all day long and give you a list of people who have inspired me, because I think that's where we draw our energy from too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You talk a lot about creating pathways, and it actually leads me to ask the opposite question, which is, we all know what some obvious obstacles are advancing in your careers and what they have been for women specifically. What do you think some obstacles have been for women in leadership more recently? And do you have any advice to guide us all through that?
Yeah, I think I think we can never sit back and just assume we're good, and
Yeah.
I think it's about, because I've been at this a while now, and I've seen comings and goings in terms of representation and leadership. And so I think we just always have to keep working towards making sure, that we're not losing ground. I think as we bring up the next generation of women leaders, helping them to understand what have been the histories, the obstacles, the challenges, the successes, because you can also lose ground. And then I think, some of my best allies along the way have been my male colleagues, so like really looking at those partnerships, because we've got some wonderful role models and mentors who can help break down barriers in other ways. And so I think it's about looking at our male counterparts in organizations too, to be part of those folks who make a bigger table, put more seats at the table. But then you have to think about even, some of the data that are coming out of the results of the pandemic and how disproportionately it's impacting women, and more women are leaving the workplace, and the impact on households and families, and how that's we're seeing the economic impact and loss of jobs and women not returning to the workforce and caregiving responsibilities. So I think we have to pay attention to that. And how do we think about creating situations that allow our workforce to work in more flexible ways, take some of these habits of working using technology to maybe ease the burden, because we still have issues such as childcare, elder care, and those caregiving roles and responsibilities still fall more heavily on women than on men. So we have to look at those, and as we're moving towards equity, I think it's really important to see women on corporate boards, because those are where some of the governance seats, and there's actually, because the United States has been slower to make progress on those issues than other countries, there's actually been movement to create legislation to do that. Well, do we need to legislate that, or should we just do it because it's the right thing to do?
Right.
And I think it was enormously inspiring when we saw Kamala Harris be sworn in as Vice President of the United States, to see a woman and a woman of color, achieve that level of national, global leadership is exciting and inspiring. So we just have to keep working at it, and it has to be about equity across the board.
Absolutely. So perhaps on a more personal level, what are some of the biggest obstacles you've had to face in your own career, and how have you overcome those?
Well, it's when I became a college president for the first time, which was, just a little while back now, there were only 20% of all the college presidents in the country were women. And that percentage was higher at community colleges than at four-year institutions. That number is now up to about 27, 28%. So we still, there's still more progress to be made when I look at just even that sector. In Massachusetts, when I was president of MCLA, there were 9 state universities. MCLA was one of the 9 state universities. At that time, 5 of the 9 state universities were led by women. Right now, when I come back into the state university system, I will be the only woman of 9 state universities. So, ebbs and flows. And so then you have to look at who are in the pipeline. How are we cultivating that leadership? How are we supporting the leadership? Why don't people stay? So what are the things that you have to look at? What are the obstacles along the way? So I just find that interesting, in terms of networking. But for me, I've had some really tremendous experiences in this. I will cite an example, and for my colleagues on the call who are familiar, like you, Jill, with the Berkshires and Bob. So when I became a new president at MCLA, and there was long before, I think many of you were part of that community or in ways like this, but there was a reception, and I had a business leader actually ask me if I was going to be comfortable driving to Pittsfield. This was North Adams. Was I going to be comfortable driving to Pittsfield? I had to say to myself, like, what am I going to encounter? Like that, I just found
what
myself,
don't I know?
Right. Like, wow, what didn't you tell me? Wow, these roads that bad? Have you heard about my driving record? I just had no idea. But it was, and then I remembered somebody else saying to me, I like that you wear pants. And I thought, that's a curious thing to say. I wanted to say, I thought of all these flippant remarks, but I had to remember I'm a college president. So I had to retain, kind of check myself and save them all for later with friends. But things like that over the years, just the things that people would say, and I would say to myself, would they be asking me that if I was a male? I'm not so sure. I've been asked when I was working with an organization in the southern part of the country, it was the entire board were men. There were no women on the board. And I was asked if I could raise money. And I was, it was just, did I know how to read a balance sheet? And I'm thinking, I'm just not so sure those would be the same questions, particularly when I've been running, an organization with a budget of $100 million. I think I'm pretty good with a balance sheet. So it's just realizing when you're in those moments, how to respond, how to answer, how to, and then how to set, the record straight. Because to me, that would always mean, I have an opportunity here to do so much more work. And, and then just building partnerships and going forward, just, finding allies and those which are many, and keeping a
Yes.
sense of humor and going forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's one. It's so interesting. I think we've all had experiences similar to that.
Mhm.
And, it's very important to keep your head up and just figure out how to navigate through it professionally and to be the bigger person.
Mhm.
And usually you win out.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about board seats and women on boards. I think a lot of people who are younger in their leadership journey and seek board positions wonder how women are doing this, because it isn't as clear as day on how to get yourself involved and put on boards. So can you talk a little bit about how to put yourself out there from a networking perspective, or how you've been fortunate enough to find those opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's depending upon what sector of board you want to work in. So if it's the nonprofit sector, or the NGO world, I think it's finding those organizations that are aligned with your own values, and where you can contribute and learn from too. I think that's always important. I want to, when I'm thinking about board work, I want to think about what can I bring, but also what can I learn, because you have the opportunity to be at the table with people with different experiences, different perspectives, and that makes it really interesting. And I think the value alignment, because you're doing this work. When it's a nonprofit board, you are a volunteer, there's no compensation that comes with this. You're doing it simply because you see it as a matter of good citizenship.
Mhm.
And so you want to make sure that you're doing it in a value aligned way. And I think you also have to be mindful, particularly now, there's a lot of pressures on boards to be paying attention to the fiduciary responsibilities, legal liability. So you really have to know what you're getting into. Is it a healthy organization? What kind of troubles do they have? What kind of challenges? What kind of opportunities do they have? Who's else at the table? And then figure out a couple of those things and look at who else is sitting on the board, and how might you be able to approach someone on the board or the CEO, or even show up and start doing some volunteer work, when it's a nonprofit. Like if there's a community day of service, go serve with the community and see how you like it, and become known to it. So I think that it's different for nonprofit than for corporate boards. Corporate boards is so much more relationship driven and skill based driven.
Mhm.
And that's where it's sometimes, even it can get so competitive that headhunters get involved in helping to identify board seats at certain corporate board levels. So,
Mhm.
and making sure that you can do it, because I think that the hardest thing is when you get on a board and you realize you can't meet your commitment, because
Right.
boards need you to be there and to be helping to grow and support and nurture the organization. So I think it's fit, what you can learn, what you can bring, and then your ability to follow through on the commitment.
Mhm.
And then when it feels like you're not learning and growing or contributing anymore, it's also okay to say, maybe it's time for me to move on and create a space for somebody else at the table.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Um, so boards, professional responsibilities, what does that leave you for time for yourself? And I think that's a really important topic. We're always, battling internally, all of us, men, women, and everyone in between. How have you created space for yourself and made sure you've had your downtime? How do you disconnect with all of technology, available from anywhere now? Or do you? How have you balanced or found it difficult to balance that throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, in different roles, some of when I was both at MCLA and UNC Asheville, which had a heavy residential component, and then the case of UNC Asheville, was a Division I school, so there was significant athletic responsibilities. I did not have to play. I just had to be a good number one fan. And it was great fun. I mean, really a lot of fun. But it is a very much a 24/7, because you've got young people, there's a lot there. So I would just find that it was so important to be able to get away for a few days when you could just stop, and really get away, and shut your phone, like I would say to my team, if you need me, please call me, because I'm not going to be checking email. Or I would create a time and say, 3 days a week, I'm going to be checking in on email from this time to this time. So if you've got anything, that's your window, and so just really, again, trusting the people that you're working with to keep things going, to take care of the things. And if it's an emergency, they will let you know. People
They'll
will
find you.
they'll find you. You can always be found. And so I think it's realizing that you've got to step away, getting out, bike riding, running, walking, doing those kinds of things to keep moving, getting, just exercise is so important. Friends, and having people you can laugh with and really talk with, and, kind of share the stories, warts and all, and know that it's not going to go anywhere. So I think those trusted folks, and I highly recommend a dog. I mean, I've got, I have two now, so I'm ready for the next adventure. But they're just awesome. So, or a goat, get a goat. You've got one right behind you right now. So.
I've heard that holding baby goats is one of the best therapies one can have, but for now I've stuck with the dogs at home too. It's really helpful.
Right.
On to probably more fun topics. What is your favorite part of your day-to-day, of your daily job?
Hands down, in any of the work that I've done, connecting with students,
Mhm.
I think about, because it's just so much fun, and the privilege to work so closely with anyone who's learning, growing, and developing. So when I'm talking students at any age, because I had 1 year at MCLA, I was able to, I had the privilege of giving a degree to someone who turned 84 years old.
Amazing.
And, so learning continues, but I think it's being part of that journey, the stories, like when you get to know a student from the time they hit your campus to the time they walk across the stage at commencement, you know a little bit more about them, and you're rooting them on in so many ways. Working with the faculty that you get to work with on, like, I can't wait to get to know this new faculty at Mass College of Art and Design because
Yeah.
of the creativity, the talent that's there. So, I'm
The
about
energy that you'll get from everyone around you.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just so, and then the chance that when you're in these roles and they bring you to, like, literally whole new places, when I think about places and tables I've been at, from, I don't know, like I've been to Mauritania, not big on everybody's travel list. In fact, I don't even know you can travel there now. It's considered a terrorist state. But, in places like that where I think, how did this kid born in Dorchester who grew up in Weymouth end up in Mauritania?
Yeah.
So just those, you just never know where life is going to take you, but being open to it and learning and soaking up every moment of what's around you is really important.
Absolutely, which is a great segue for learning. Do you have any books that you'd recommend for those of us either just looking to get into leadership earlier on in our careers, or someone who's curious about civics and social justice and wants to become a little bit more educated there?
Yeah, I can send you a whole biography and literature review afterwards. But one of the books that I've just gone back to several times is it's John Lewis's autobiography, and it's called Walking with the Wind. And it was his story. It was written. He wrote it many, many years ago, and it was really about his coming of age in the civil rights movement and what he went through, the lessons he learned, the perspective of what it means to stand on the shoulders of others. And I just, over the years, when I've been, trying to draw inspiration or think about it, because it was also reflections of him in his early life. And then reading his last book, or the book John Meacham wrote right before the congressman's death, reflecting on a different part of the lifespan, or a life more completed. When I read those two books together and just look at the consistency and the continuity in his values, and how he applied those values throughout a lifetime of incredible work, death-defying work in some cases. Those give me some strength and some real ambitious. And then another one I would recommend is a book called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And that looks at the migration of when, African Americans moved from the South to the north, what was driving that: civil rights movement, generational change, economics. And now when you think about some of the migration patterns where people are leaving these communities, it poses the question, what's going on, what's driving the changes now? So, but it's a beautiful story, dense, layered, complex, and really looks at a period in this country's history where our economic conditions were improved because we had so many individuals from diverse backgrounds moving and driving change in our communities in some powerful ways. Hard stories, rich stories, but stories that tell us about lives and the differences that people make.
That's fantastic. I'm glad this is being recorded so we can go back and I'll jot that down later. So who are some people, you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but I'd love to dive a little deeper into it. Who are some people who have done great work within civics and social justice that you admire that you'd like to highlight?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think of, somebody who just did incredible work in this space, the late Senator Ted Kennedy. And I had the privilege to get to know him. I gave him an honorary degree one year, which was fabulous. And then when I was recruited to come back from North Carolina to run the Kennedy Institute, that was a big factor because I just knew the senator's deep commitment to civics, social justice, and what was happening in the country. So, he's just been, in terms of a life trajectory over the lifespan, what he accomplished and the difference he made, that I find just truly inspirational. I mean, there's a North Adams native, a guy named Paul Farmer, who has done, incredible international life-saving health work, Partners Healthcare, and just true. If you've Mountains Beyond Mountains was a book Tracy Kidder wrote about Paul Farmer's life, but this kid from North Adams who has gone on and has changed global health conditions and is still doing that work. Bill and Denise Richard, two folks that I work with now, their son Martin Richard was the youngest victim of the marathon bombing, and they began the MR8 Foundation and have just devoted their energy to how do you do civic good? How do you honor a life cut short and a tragedy? But the way that they invest in community.
With such positivity.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring.
They really inspire me. So just, I think, you look around and there are people everywhere doing work that you can draw some inspiration from. I think you just have to look. They're there all over the place.
Everywhere.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So are you a morning person or a night owl? And how do you think either would impact your career success?
I am a morning person. I get to a certain point at night and I'm like, I will tell you, you can rally. So, particularly when you're on college campuses. So when there's a couple of times where I've had to be the kind of the head cheerleader, if you will, for Midnight Madness, which kicks off the basketball season. So that you're doing work that you love when you show up in a gymnasium at midnight and you're, leading the crowd in a chair. Okay. I'm just saying that there are things that we
colors and all, I can picture it.
The whole thing. But I definitely, the morning hours are, that's that quiet time for kind of thinking, doing some reading, looking at email, because then you're in the day and it's just so hard. Yeah.
It's good to have time to get ready before everything starts getting really crazy, really fast, which is, I'm sure, a daily occurrence for you in your field. What are some habits, maybe just one or a couple habits that you do every day that help you form your day?
A serious cup of coffee early in the morning. So it really is carving out that quiet space. And, and I think it's because, I grew up, I was one of 6 kids, shared a bedroom with 2 of my sisters, 8 people in a house, 1 bathroom, growing up. So I always got up early so I could just kind of beat the rush. And I think I've maintained that habit. And so the morning time where I can just get that, seriously, a good cup of coffee, the thinking time, and to just clear my head. And then I like to lace up my sneakers and get out the door while the sun is still coming up or breaking through. There's just something about that quiet time where, I'm fortunate, I'm privileged. I live in Situate now. And so I'm able to kind of in my circle kind of get on the beach sometimes early in the morning too. And I make a point of stopping and reflecting and looking at where I am and being grateful for the privilege I have of health and being out there and doing that, and mindful that that is not the case in so many communities, so many lives, so many parts of the world. And, I think about coming around that hairpin turn in North Adams. And when I first moved to the Berkshires and someone said, oh, that won't, you'll get used to that. I never did. And I'm so glad I never did, because I would come around that corner and the valley would open up and I would just take that moment to say, wow, so I think it's taking those moments, Jill, to just acknowledge our privilege and how fortunate we are, and be mindful that we have so much more to do because there are so many less fortunate than we are on any given day.
And I think it's so important, especially as we're talking to somebody like you, to remember how much impact you have on the people around you. You're drawing all this inspiration and impact from all these things in your life, and probably most of the time without even knowing it, you're then passing that on to others who look up to you just the same. So remembering that we're all mentors even when we don't know it. We're impacting others even when we don't know it is a really important awareness piece for us all to have. And I think you do that so eloquently. So thank you for being such an inspiration to all of us, and for all the impacts you've had. I appreciate them. And I know everybody here does, and everybody that you've worked with, I'm sure, feels the same. So thank you so much for your time and your honesty, and for all of that, and for sharing that with us today. I know we have Q&A time, so I wanted to make sure we left time for that. I could talk to you all day. So
is there anybody else here, Jill?
No, it's just us. We're just having a blast. I know. But so I do want to hand it back over to Heather. I don't know if any questions have come in, but I know some will. So let's see what's out there.
Okay, I'm just going to remove spotlights so everybody, if you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or unmute yourself. You should be able to, but if you can't raise your hand now, I'll unmute you. This is a pretty, Peter Foreman raised his hand. Okay. There you go, Peter.
Thanks. Great segment, great interview. Let me ask you, Mary, about the generational handoff on leadership. You're always around students, so you probably see it a little bit more, but one of the biggest challenges I think we have on the South Shore and in the chamber is finding that next generation of professional leaders and stewards who are going to care about our nonprofits and our communities and lead the way. With any economic development, I think it's really a triad of government, nonprofits, and private sector business leaders. And with all the way that all the mergers of businesses, when you get to a certain size, I worry about who are those business leaders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question, Peter. And I think, one I see with the younger generation, and I hate to use that word younger generation, but I think the emerging generation of leaders, I mean, there's some incredible leaders in our community. And I think we in organizations have to work hard to try to find them and figure out how we bring them in, because they want to connect in different ways, so it's meeting them where they are. I would imagine that the use of technology is going to help increase participation, particularly from, the millennials or Gen Z folks who, don't necessarily want to be driving and sitting at a board meeting. They really use their time differently. They use technology differently. So I think being mindful about how we can create those points of access that reflect the changes in terms of how this generation comes of age and how they think about their time and how they think about the use of technology. Businesses that have, that's where business is thinking about their own value proposition, because I'm seeing graduates of our colleges who want to be, looking at private sector companies who have a deep commitment to sustainability, commitment to racial equity and racial justice. So, looking at a private sector companies, profit companies, looking at their value proposition, because that's how some of the talented young folks are making decisions about where to go to work. They want to be working in a value aligned industry, even in their day job. And then I think it's employers making space for doing that as part of your job. That's the other trend I'm seeing too, is that where life is so full and complex, creating some time during the day and encouraging young leadership to participate in boards, as opposed to it's something you do after work or on your own time. That can happen. You develop those habits. But I think as we're trying to bring the next generation along, creating that space and those habits as part of your work, that it's part of maybe your professional development plan, that you're going to serve on a board and we are going to help you to make that happen. But I think it's using technology in different ways. It's really looking at business leaders, how you're leading with your values when you're recruiting. I think it's about also building that into somebody's plan for professional growth, that there's an expectation that you serve and sit on boards, and we're going to help you do that as part of your work, not as an additional to your work. And then, like any muscle, you're building that in. Community days of service, that can also be an entryway, because sometimes folks aren't ready to make that full commitment to a board. But if a board, if there's a partnership, on a community project, it can inspire somebody to want to learn more about an organization that they may want to spend more time with and service with. And so I think it's got to be different ways, but you're right. I mean, there's a generational shift that's happening, but we're also seeing the next generation come up. I mean, I go back to looking at what's happening in the city of Boston right now, with a very different looking city council, a mayoral field that's changing, young leadership coming in and stepping into roles. So there is that next gen is emerging. And I think nonprofits are going to have to do some aggressive outreach and networking to get them to want to join these boards. So it's got to be across the board.
Let me, you mentioned younger people or the next generation of leaders being mindful of picking the companies they're looking at. We were talking a little bit the other day about our economic plan, and one of the big challenges is getting younger professionals or changing the demographics of the South Shore and getting younger people to come to the South Shore. You've done the thing in Nashville. You've grew up, born in Boston. You're going back to work in Boston. You live down on the South Shore. How do you think the South Shore ranks in terms of being an attractive place to live for younger professionals? Disregard house pricing as the key driver to where people are going to live. How do you think the South Shore stacks up, and how do we strengthen that? You worked on it in a single city with Asheville. How do I work on it? How do some of us work on it as a region?
Yeah. You've got to have things that, I think it's the walkability of places, because food, shopping, good beer, if you think about where, there's a reason why you see, a lot of energy around some of the microbreweries. I'm not kidding you. You drive by some of these places on a Saturday or Sunday, and there are young folks sitting out in parking lots on bar stools with baby strollers, and because it's about places to gather. So I think it's about, kidding aside, it's about where can you create a walkable community? So, suburban communities, South Shore is a good example. They were kind of like a response to people wanting to move out of the cities where, I want my green lawn, I want my space, I want my riding mower. And folks don't want that anymore. They at certain points in time, you want different things. And I found that, for communities to retain that young talent, it's about how do you have an ecosystem that reflects what they're looking for? Spaces to gather, spaces to walk to, bookstores. Crazy as it may sound, even though we do a lot on Amazon, I have met a lot of young people who like bookstores, and it's as long as there's a coffee shop in it. So it's thinking about combining more than one thing, so that there's an energy around it. When you've got some of the beauty of some of the South Shore towns, capitalizing on the ability to bike ride, to go kayaking, what are the other sectors that attract young, energetic, and it doesn't mean young, I mean energetic folks of any age who want to be outside, playing in their environment, but you have to make it obvious to them. We just I think some of the suburban communities have not done their best at marketing what's there for young people to build a life, and then access to transportation. Because if you are, if the jobs are in more of an urban center, but you can live a little bit out, what what is the public transportation nodes like? That is critically important. More and more folks, they're not necessarily bound to their cars. They want other ways to get to work, public transportation, biking routes. So how does that all, tie together to make it communities accessible? The communities that have been able to use water ferries, have seen some success, but you've got to have things that attract them, things that keep them there, and then the transportation to get to if the jobs aren't right there, getting to the jobs easy matters. And then at a certain point, it's about the quality of the schools, right? So you look at the generational shifts, what are the schools like? So that as people are thinking about that next part of life where they're going to be raising kids, decisions change again about what do you want, what do you need? And now, and it is going to be really interesting to see, and this is this moment in time to understand what we want in our communities post-pandemic is going to be really important, because we saw the movement out of tight urban clusters to folks wanting space again. But still around that space, we want walkable communities. We want to be able to be outside. We want coffee shops, and we want places where we can gather with other young folks and not feel isolated. So it's about that community building aspect, and arts and culture play a huge piece of that. Is there music? Are there movies? Is there the opportunity to see a play without having to, break the bank in doing it? So that passive and active recreation components, I think, are really important, really important.
Bob Fraser, do you want to ask a question?
Hi, Mary, and thanks for your words of wisdom and the inspiration. Before I ask my question, though, I'm going to digress a second. I can go back to your remark about the comment someone made to you about your ability to drive to Pittsfield from North Adams. I don't think that was totally gender driven. I recall recently being at an event in Pittsfield, and there were a lot of dignitaries from North Adams, and the speaker remarked that he recalled when it was an overnight trip. So. Mm-hmm. I think it's a little geographic based as well, but as you step into your new role at MassArt and take on this leadership position again, how do you see your challenge with post-pandemic of connecting people and breaking down some of the polarization that's in our society today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question, Bob. And I think, educational institutions have a wonderful opportunity to do that. And, when I was at MCLA and when I was at UNC Asheville, it's very much how I led, because I think colleges can bring communities together through conversations, through authors, different people who poke us and stimulate us in different ways to get us to have conversations that we need to have and should be having. So I think there's a wonderful convening opportunity and responsibility that higher ed plays. And when I think about Mass College of Art and Design, we have that, and we also are able to do it against the backdrop of how the arts bring us together. When you are gathering around something where you're sharing points of view, you're looking at a piece of sculpture, or you look at a piece of art, and you're suddenly talking about what do you see in it, because you might see one thing, I might see something different. And I think that we have rich opportunities to bring us together around things we can be learning from that we have in common. And I think that's the way we have to rebuild communities, focus on what we have in common, understand and talk honestly about the differences, because they are significant, creating those conditions for decent conversation where we can learn, but having the hard conversations. I've seen too many times where when conversations begin to get hard, they get shut down. But you have to create the conditions so people are able to listen and not feel attacked, and be able to understand why somebody may see the world in a very different way than we do. And then pointing towards what do we have to do together, regardless of what we may think about politically or whom we may cheer on. And, are you a Red Sox fan or are you a Yankees fan? Well, who cares? What we have to do is think about what do we need to do in common to improve the conditions of our community. So I think, Bob, it's about refining that common ground, acknowledging the things that have pulled us apart, being honest about those things that have pulled us apart, look at the root causes, and be willing to tackle some of those root causes, and then be able to cut each other some slack when we're trying, to be able to say, that we have more to learn, more to do. And, but that we only are going to do our best work together if we do that together. But we have to be honest about our shortcomings, celebrate when we've done something that moves us forward, and then don't lose heart, because you know what happens when people start to give up and walk away. Then it's harder to get them back to the table again. So I think that's where good community leadership really comes in. But we can do, I've seen it happen. And then teaching the next generation up and coming who are pushing us to change. And it's a good push. I'm so excited. I'm so encouraged by the leadership that I see coming. Peter, back to your point, we just have to figure out how we harness it and learn from it, because there's a generation that is serious about making a difference. And we have some really wonderful opportunities ahead if we're working in partnership with each other.
Patrice, do you have a question?
So it's less of a question and more of just a comment or a couple of comments. First of all, I just, again, wanted to congratulate you, Mary, on your recent appointment to the Mass College of Art and Design, and why I'm so excited about you in that leadership role. First of all, obviously, I'm the ED here at South Shore Arts Center, but before I came here, I spent 16 years at Artists for Humanity, which is a vehicle for young people in the arts, but it's a vehicle of youth employment.
Mm-hmm.
And what we used to hear all the time is our teens were coming from the most disenfranchised neighborhoods, most under-resourced, most violent, right? And people would say to us, potential donors, why are you leading young people on a pathway to being starving artists? And our response was always, nope, we're giving them the skills that they need to be leaders in the workforce, because art has such an integral role in activating what we call STEM. And I know you've been a leader again in STEAM back in Asheville, but the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, all of that learning is activated by making art, particularly for young people who find those four disciplines challenging. And the other piece is, of course, Artists for Humanity was a vehicle for social change, and your social justice commitment marries those two things together. And so I'm so excited to see where you're going to take MassArt in terms of where our young people are going to go, the young people that go there, and changing people's lives. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Patrice. And I couldn't agree with you more when I think about the skills of curiosity, creativity, questioning, different approaches. You think about the work we need to do to create healthy communities, and how we think about design and how people engage. That's all through the creative process, and designers and artists and makers contribute to the well-being of community in so many different ways. And it does attract, I've seen over the years, we did at UNC Asheville, we did something, I had a faculty member who started a girls' summer coding camp. And, you'd see all these little girls who were, working on writing these intricate codes. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm in a room full of geniuses. And they frankly scared me. I was like, wow. But that energy and creativity, because it's using the same parts of the brain, it's just getting them to realize and appreciate those skills are there, and they just need to be teased out and pulled out and nurtured.
And those skill sets are the ones that are going to drive. We don't know what the workforce of tomorrow is going to look like. We don't know what careers will be around in 10 years because they haven't been invented yet, but they're going to be invented by our artists and designers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Sorry. Does anyone else have questions? Just feel free to unmute and ask. It's an open discussion, or Peter will keep talking. Can I ask how you got to where you wanted to get so involved in civic and social justice? What was your root cause or inspiration to look at that?
Yeah. One of my very first two, you have those one of my very first jobs coming out of college was I worked out on Thompson Island in Boston Harbor. And so I actually took a boat to work from Kelly's Landing in South Boston in February. And it was to work with kids from the Boston Public Schools. And we would go into the Boston Public Schools, and it was shortly after busing. And so going into some of the Boston Public Schools at a period of time where there were just some enormous difficulties and the challenges that both teachers and students were facing, and seeing the impact that education could have on. And I remembered walking into one school in Boston, and this is going back many, 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 many years, and a lot has changed. But when the doors were being unlocked inside by an officer who was unlocking a padlock to let us in, I just remembered, as a relatively young person myself, thinking, who are we trying to keep in, or who are we trying to keep out? You know, so these moments that you tuck away and think, how do I work in this space and in this way? And then I had an opportunity. I worked for the Cambridge Housing Authority, and it was in the on the heels of deinstitutionalization. And so a lot of individuals, really interesting people with complex issues, were the state hospitals were closing for good reason. A lot of individuals were being discharged from an institutionalized setting to community where they didn't have housing options. So they would pretty quickly become homeless, and then they were identified as meeting a match for public housing. And I was a community organizer, social worker in public housing in Cambridge. And I met some fascinating, fascinating people that opened my mind to the fact. It made me decide not to pursue an MSW, but to go the public policy route, because I saw a system that was terribly broken, terribly flawed, and people were suffering significantly. And it was about saying, how do we do better? You know, so I think it were a couple of experiences early on that made me then pick my educational pathways and think about, you know, where I could make a difference at what point. That, thank goodness for people who do that really important social work face to face and change people's lives. And I realized I wanted to try to help intervene in the systems that created those broken promises in the first place, and see if some other point in the cycle I might be able to make a difference. So that put me in a public policy path for the rest of my degree work and my research. And then I just see education as one of the greatest tools for leveling the playing field and creating conditions of equity and bringing that work into the community in powerful ways. So it's been able to find a place to do that work, and really, you know, be so privileged to do that work.
Thank you. That's amazing. Anybody else?
That's one of the most inspirational things I've ever
I
heard.
know.
It's
I know.
amazing. Amazing.
It's really great. Okay. But this was lovely. It was just very, I have like this whole thing of notes, just, you know, things that you said that we're going to have to take snippets of and use, and very inspiring and wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Grant, for being with us this morning. I just want to, again, thank our sponsors for Women in Local Leadership. It is 3 Mentor Advisory, Brigham Health, Hollywood Agency, and Mountain One Bank. Our next one is in August with Janelle Woods McNish, who is the Managing Director of Community Impact at the Trustees. So that should also be an interesting thing. She has worked with us on our Leadership in Action, which is our program where we bring in the 200 girls to Curry College and have a full day, which unfortunately we haven't had in 2 years, but hopefully in 2022 we can have it again. But she's participated on a panel for us there, and she's wonderful. So again, thank you, Dr. Grant. Thank you, Mountain One. Thank you, Jill, for moderating, and we will see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Bob. And thanks for everyone for coming this morning. Keep up your great work and enjoy this beautiful day. Appreciate the chance to be with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mary. Congrats.